Extraordinary story out of the US today about a chemical called chlormequat. Now, you can't use this here in Australia. To use it is against the food regulations. But over in the US, it's used widely on grains, products in particular, such as oats, which then come through in cereal and porridge, etc. This particular chemical has been linked to reduced fertility, altered fetal growth, delayed puberty, etc. It has, in a survey, been found in 80% of American people. And you have to ask the question, if this one particular chemical is getting through, and in America, clearly they have no regulations against using it, it can be used in imported foods, etc., etc., how many others might there be floating around that we don't know?
Mate, I need an hour-long special of just me talking it down the barrel on that. But this is something that was marched out in the 1940s. It started. There was a whole chemical program on our food. Anyone can research this. It's not any kind of conspiracy theory. They started using this. For heaven's sake, this highly toxic agricultural chemical that we're talking about tonight, they spray it on not just oats, but other grains so that it can't bend and therefore is easier to harvest. They don't give a flying rip about you and me, okay? That is why it falls to us to do our own homework. Why is something like this even allowed into our food? It shouldn't be. It clearly says reduced fertility, altered fetal growth, delayed puberty. Many of those are easily provable now if you simply look at the Western nations' demographics, especially the reduced fertility. It is eye-wateringly low. No one's doing a thing about it, and no one's talking about what might be resulting, what is causing this. And of course, one of the most powerful things we ever put in our mouths is food. Food is the most powerful drug you will ever give yourself. And if it's not healthy, it's not grown properly, or it's massively just processed, which is 99% of what you pick up at the grocery store, this is the lifestyle that they've encouraged. And now people are not only malnutritioned, but when you think you're eating something healthy, like, oh, it's grains, oh, it's oats, Quaker's oats. Who would ever think that Quaker's oats are going to be detrimental to your health? And there it is. They also showed that throughout the years, the increase in how much they were picking up of this very toxic chemical grew exponentially. So whoever's been spraying it or using it in the foods that they're making has just started using it a hell of a lot more.
So we've talked about the government's responsibility to guard the borders, to guard a country's food supply. By any measure, they're doing a terrible job on both of those. And when it comes to education, they're not doing much better either. A study found more than half the English texts being studied by Victorian Year 12 students promote woke identity politics. Surprise, surprise. The IPA did a study and found 19 of the 36 texts on the reading list are woke or social justice ideology texts grounded in critical race theory or critical gender theory, and teachers are required to select these texts by Australian authors, but of the 17 Australian authored texts, 13 promote social justice ideology. Only 11 of the texts are non-ideological and only 6 are considered essential reading from the Western canon. Now, these books talk about things like the need for compensation for LGBTQ communities, the dispossession of Indigenous tribes, damages of masculinity or damages caused by masculinity, flaws in colonisation. The Herald Sun interviewed a teacher who did not want to be named, but she said that the reading texts for Year 12 students in Victoria, the message they would get from them is that if you're straight, you're thinking too narrowly, and if you're also male and white, you should bend your knee and confess your sins before you become irredeemable. The teacher said, I can't call it brainwashing, but I can call it increasing influence, and if asked to justify to a parent, I would have difficulty justifying it. Caleb, it reminds me of that Winston Churchill quote. He said, my education was interrupted only by my schooling. And that's exactly what seems to be happening in our country.
Indeed, and the chickens are already coming home to roost. I mean, there was a survey by a university in Victoria last year that found the majority of students prefer to learn their history through the eyes of Indigenous people and refugees. They're not interested in the concepts of federation or the Anzacs anymore because they keep having these texts put in front of them. They keep having certain topics put in front of them by the teachers. It is endorsed not only by the individual schools and the individual teachers, it's endorsed by the state governments and the education system. And it has become so pervasive, so large, it is almost impossible to turn it around. Because even if you had an enterprising education minister who said, I wanted to do something about this, the teachers would kick up a stink, right? And we know how much power the teachers' union has. This has gone so far that I'm not sure it will ever be reversed, unfortunately.
Well, it does seem impossible at this stage. I mean, progressives in the educational system are constantly trying to normalise this, normalise that. How about you just try acting normal so that our kids can too, instead of trying to all masculinity is toxic masculinity, climate change is imminent doom, etc. and so on. Stop trying to normalise all your morally bankrupt agendas and just act normal, for crying out loud. If you want to try and indoctrinate adults, go for your life, but always, they go for the kids because they don't have the brain space and the know-how to fight back whatsoever. So they're just willing sieves. It's terrifying.